he goes, I'm just going to tell you, you're going to die if you continue to do what you're doing. You need to stop. You've got to let your body heal.
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 147 of the Strokecast. Today's episode is brought to you by the fine folks at Modus Nova. To find out if Modus Nova can help you recover the use of an affected limb after stroke, visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova. And by the fine folks at Like-Minded. To find out if the Like-Minded membership program can help your post-stroke life, visit strokecast.com/like-minded. Blake Hill has lived life as a Hollywood lighting technician, a screenwriter, an author, a surfer, a coffee enthusiast, of course, and as a stroke survivor. His latest novel, Westfalia, is his most personal work yet, though, and it's born out of a stroke, out of divorce, and out of a trans-Canadian bike trip. So now, let's meet Blake Hill. So Blake, thank you so much for joining us on the show this week.
Thank you, Bill. I'm happy to be here.
So what was your life like in leading up to your stroke?
Wow, that's a really great question. So life leading up to the stroke, I don't know. I felt I was in the best shape of my life. Surfing every day, 2 kids. And at that stage, let's see, my kids were, I think my son was maybe around 10 and my daughter was 7. So, just busy, really busy, and just felt really good. Felt amazing, actually. We had a little house that we had, it was kind of our summer home. And then we had moved up to another house, and I just wanted to have it completely ready for when my wife and 2 kids showed up, and was just hammering down, really, just head down, get it done. So we moved in, and it's so unusual because I just remember the sunset that night. And the sunset was just absolutely beautiful. And woke up the next morning, wasn't feeling quite right. So I asked my wife, I was like, hey, can you because my son wanted to go surfing with all of his friends. I said, do you mind taking them today? I'm just beat. Like, I'm not quite myself. And during the move, I'd been staying at a friend's house. So I said, I need to go back down to my buddy's house and make sure it's all back in order. And I got down there and I was on the phone with him just saying, hey, I'm locking up your house, and thanks for letting me stay here. And then all of a sudden, my whole right side went just completely numb. It was like a light switch, just boom. And then all I can remember was he was screaming in the phone, because I do like to play practical jokes. And he was like, quit messing around. What's wrong with you? And I thought I was talking to him, but actually my voice was so slurred, he couldn't understand a word I was saying. And in that moment, I went and I didn't lay down on the couch, but I just propped myself up on the couch. And I knew in that moment, I was like, I've got to get 2 words out or I'm stuck. Nobody knows where I am. My friend who I was on the phone with lived in Canada. And all I could get out was call Linda, which was my wife at the time. And he said he could barely understand that. He called her, and then she called the ambulance, which then they all showed up there at the house, and with my kids and the whole, not just an ambulance, but the whole fire truck, the whole big scene. That's when they loaded me up. And there was just that odd feeling of just being lying on the gurney as they roll me out, and then remembering the doors closing and seeing my son and my daughter and all their friends just looking in this ambulance and just thinking, what the hell's happening to me? This is insane. Like I feel like Superman who just totally got smashed.
That's one of the things that's just so incredible about this whole experience is just the way suddenly you go from just feeling mostly okay to feeling tired to suddenly that switch is flipped, and all of a sudden you're thinking with the brain that you can't trust anymore, and it doesn't understand what's going on and can't control anything else that's going around you, and then just trying to process that while living it, while trying to figure out next steps is just one of those experiences that is just so weird and so wrong that nobody should have to go through. Yeah, meditation is an interesting thing. I know Joe Borges, the host over at the NeuroNerds podcast, he started meditating after his stroke and has had tremendous benefits from it. Is meditation something you did before your stroke as well, or is that sort of a thing that's come into your life afterwards?
I didn't really specifically meditate, but I did a meditation practice unknowingly. And then about almost 8 years, like a little bit after the stroke, I didn't really equate it to that, but I started doing TM practice, transcendental meditation, and I'm consistent. I stay with that. I should be doing it twice a day, but I at least do it once a day. It's 20 minutes, and I think that's what keeps me going. I'm able to, because you can feel that at point where you feel like, oh my God, I'm falling off the cliff. I need to reset. And that's what it gives me. It gives me the afternoon reset, because I usually do it around 2:00 in the afternoon, or try to. It's a huge reset.
Well, I think that's really interesting to think about it as, and to experience it as that reset moment. There's a number of different ways that we see people sort of accessing that sort of reset. I talked with Carmen de la Paz a few months ago. She's another survivor, and she does a lot of woodworking. And after her stroke especially, she finds there's that doing woodworking and working with a lathe and working with all those types of things, that hyper focus you get on a task is almost a form of meditation in motion to clear away a lot of the stuff that's in your head. And she finds that helps her get that reset experience as well.
That's true. I mean, you're kind of making me go back in my brain and really think about, because I typically don't talk about my stroke. Mm-hmm. I've always kept it pretty private, but you like to dive back and remember the days when it was a challenge to even have that one task focus. And you really, it was a struggle just to do that. Like there's a lot of things that I had to put to the side. Like I didn't allow myself to get on a motorcycle, and you would have that one task focus and you would start it. And then all of a sudden you'd be like, what am I doing? Like, what did I start? What am I supposed to complete this? Like some really weird stuff.
It's really, really fascinating how that happens. So, I mean, what type of stroke did you have?
You know, I wish I maintained all that information. What caused the stroke is I had a hole in the center of my heart, which allowed trash to go through, mm-hmm. which for my entire life, and especially as a kid, I passed out a lot, and they could never figure it out. And I went through so much testing, I just nonstop testing as a kid to figure out why I'd pass out so much. And I'm tall, so they always said, or I'm 6'4", but they always said, well, you're growing too fast. Your blood can't keep up to your brain.
Well, thanks for that. I'll try to stop growing so fast.
Yeah, exactly. So I remember I believe I was with I can't remember if it was a heart doctor or a brain doctor. And I remember telling him, hey man, you know, I've had these massive migraines my whole life where I can feel them coming on. It would be just like a little click in my brain, feel them coming on, and know that if I didn't lay down and put myself into total blackness, that I would lose vision. And he said, that has nothing to do with trash through your heart. And I said, I think it does. I really feel like this is a blessing. And so what they did is they put a titanium patch in the middle to fill the hole. Mm-hmm. And ever since that was done, haven't had a migraine, haven't lost my vision, and we're going on almost 10 years. So it was a blessing in the end, because it was a challenge that, all of a sudden, I remember once I was driving in the car with my son. He was little, and I was like, Daddy's going to pass out for a minute. I'm going to pull over, but it's going to be okay. And then immediately pulled over, passed out, came to, and when I would come to in those moments, I would be so drained, and I would just have to go home and go to bed. And which is scary that's a huge deal for my son. I feel like it was just a blessing. Like I would hate to be 80 years old and going through and then trying to have the recovery time and then the residuals that happen even today.
That hole in the heart, that PFO is something that, we hear about a fair amount. Turns out I have one in there too, but it's they discovered it during my time in the ER, but turns out it was small enough that they don't think it was involved in my stroke. But it's probably one of the reasons why, even as a kid, I never had, the physical endurance for extensive running or anything like that. I was only good for short bursts. But if that hole lets blood get through my system without stopping by the lungs to pick up more oxygen first, it becomes a lot harder to maintain some of those high endurance activities.
I've never heard it explained in that way. That's interesting. I only spent, things came back really rapidly for me. Not my strength, but like my speech started to come back. I could feel my face coming back. So I only spent 2 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So only 2 days. And, so I spent the 2 days, came back, and they said, you need to take it easy. And of course, I'm a little bit stubborn, and I needed to prove to myself that I was okay. And I did some really stupid stuff. I remember at one point I went back to the doctor because I barely had the energy to walk. And then something just didn't feel right in my body, and went to the doctor, and he said, you have two choices right now. And where we live on Maui, it's about 45 minutes to an hour to the hospital.
Wow.
And he said, I'm going to give you two choices. You can either call a friend to take you to the hospital, or I'm calling you an ambulance. But you're leaving here and going back to ER. So I did that twice. And then finally on the second time, he looked at me and said, he goes, I'm just going to tell you, you're going to die if you continue to do what you're doing. You need to stop. You've got to let your body heal. And that hit me pretty hard. So I did. Once I let go, it was like my house is 2 stories. I couldn't even walk up the steps to get to my bedroom. So I made a little camp out downstairs bedroom, and pretty much that was my hold up there for probably about 2 months, and just with minimal activity. I felt blessed that things could come back and I could communicate, because that was one of the frustrations in the hospital, was they're asking me questions, but you're inaudible. You're trying to communicate and you can't. And there's like some serious things that you need to convey to them. And I'm sure you felt the same way.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Is just trying to understand all of this. And I think one of the things that is also really one of the weirdest things to think about too, is that when you're going through this, things that you could do effortlessly before, taking extensive walks, rebuilding a house, all of this other stuff, suddenly it is just exhausting to walk 10 feet or to do any of this stuff. And it's not that your muscles in your body are tired or overworked. It's that, your brain is just exhausted from trying to tell these muscles to work. And that is so weird to adjust to. Just the idea that, you're so tired because your brain is experiencing all this. And there's nothing wrong. I found I had to accept that there was nothing, and even today, there is nothing wrong with my hand or my arm, and there is nothing wrong with my leg, and there never was. The problem was literally all in my head the whole time. And that doesn't mean it's not real. It's still very real, but the brain just doesn't have the energy to go ahead and do things in a different way, because it has to send those commands in a very different way to make the body start to respond to it again. You're trying to do a job that, maybe it takes 10 people, and your brain is trying to do it with 3, and just sending out those commands and just getting exhausted. And then when you're a high energy person who's always done a lot of stuff, been very active, to have to recognize that taking a nap and going to sleep is actually work. It is actually doing things as part of recovery. It's like when the highway department shuts down the freeway overnight. They're not doing it because the freeway needs a break or is lazy. They're doing it because there's repair work that can only be done when there's no traffic on it. And that's what sleep is like after stroke. You have to go to sleep because there are things the brain can only do when you're not awake.
True.
How long was it then before you got back up on the surfboard?
The first time I paddled back out was about a week later. And that was one of those moments that was really stupid. And then after that, I honestly can't remember, but I'm going to say it was probably about 6 months.
How is the experience of surfing then different after stroke than it was before?
There were stages. One being was recognizing that my skill level with making quick decisions had diminished. And I still recognize that today. So if it's really crowded out, I have to be super self-conscious, because if I need to make quick decisions, there are times where my brain just goes, nope, not doing it. And then there's other times that you feel good. So it can be detrimental to others and to myself. So I have to just be aware of really where I'm at emotionally. If I'm not feeling quite 100%, then I tend to really pull back so I don't hurt anybody. Because there have been times where I know I need to make a quick turn so I don't, run someone over. And the next thing I know, I'm like, it's just not happening. So I just try to avoid those situations, and I know my limitations and deal with it the best I can just so I don't hurt someone else or myself.
That's going to be a really tough thing then, to be able to make that adjustment. And there's an element of certainly maturing into that process as well. Now, with the surfing and with your experience in returning to surfing then, how has that impacted the way you talk to your son about his own surfing career? I mean, do you find that you've learned more as a result of your stroke experience for surfing that you're able to then help him with? Or how is that whole bundle of stuff with your surfing it impacting the way he surfs?
The translation would be more just how we view life, and that being that to visualize and see yourself doing it, because the brain doesn't really know if you're doing it or not. So if you can visualize yourself doing it, then it thinks you are. And my son's had to deal with his own setbacks. He broke his femur about 4 years ago, and he was surfing, and he's, both my kids have been taught that since the day they were born, is to visualize how you want to do it, see yourself doing it, and then do it, and take the steps to make that happen. So we've both had to go through that and just using the power of the mind, the brain, to visualize where you want to be. And that's where it comes from. So that translates to anything that you do in life, whether you're surfing or whatever the task at hand may be. And to see yourself doing it well and over and over and over. It's repetitive.
About a year ago, we had Peter Levine on the show as well, talking about his book, Stronger After Stroke. And one of the things he talked about in that conversation was they've actually done the MRI studies of actually looking at people's brains and seeing that the part of the brain that lights up when you're walking, for example, also lights up when you are watching somebody walk or when you are visualizing somebody walking. So the brain is getting that same stimulation from that visualization and from that focused watching on those activities as it is when you're actually doing the activity.
I feel blessed, though, that my body came back as quickly as it did. That's one thing I have to say, because when I see someone who's had a stroke and the functions of the body are not coming back. And I'm just extremely grateful that I was able to, and not even I called upon, I'm a big believer, man. When I was in the back of that ambulance going to the hospital, I was praying and asking angels, like, I need your help. I need your guidance. This is what I need. And I'm asking for the help. And everyone has to believe in whatever it is that brings love and God into their life. It's not that I feel guilty when I see someone who has a stroke, but I definitely, I feel for them because things haven't come back for them. And I think to myself, I was that and was able to come back and rather quickly. So I feel blessed.
So, you mentioned a few minutes ago that you really were, basically keeping your stroke quiet or trying to keep it, for the most part, a secret. Why was that?
I guess that stems from just being private in general for my entire life. Close friends knew, most family members. And then I just didn't want to have that. One, I didn't want to have the label. And also I wanted to be able to reintegrate myself back into society and not have everyone walk up to me and say, "Are you okay?" Which that did happen because I didn't want to be reminded of it. I wanted to move forward. And I felt with how I think about life and how I visualize, my visualizations were based on moving forward. And if I ran into someone and every time they asked me, "Are you okay?" Like, "How are you feeling?" I still get that today, almost 10 years later, but I can talk about it now because I have been able to move past. I just didn't want the reminder. I'm just weird like that, I guess.
Well, there's nothing weird about it. As in my post-stroke life, I have very visible physical disabilities. So there's no way for me to meet somebody and in person and just pretend that nothing happened. So I've gone sort of the opposite way and sort of embraced it and gotten into just sort of a bigger focus on it. But everybody is going to have to respond differently, and the way your body and your brain respond after stroke will a lot of times just inform how we want to to talk about it, or how we want to not talk about it and inform that. It's, it's one of those things where when you've seen one stroke, you've seen one stroke, because everyone is going to be so different and have so much variety.
It is interesting, though, when I do meet other people who have experienced it, there's similarities with a lot. And I don't know if you experience this. Like I'm challenged to sit in a restaurant and have a conversation with someone. The ambient noise it's nails on a chalkboard. And it's all I have to truly look at the individual and focus as hard as I can so that I can understand what they're saying to me. And that's still today. And so, and then, just the memories, like there's a lot of things I think I felt like there's a lot of memory that's been erased. And then some things I remember great. And
yeah. One of the things that is powerful back before the COVID times, when we had in-person support group meetings, was just having new people come into that meeting, and maybe they struggled with walking, or maybe they lived with aphasia and struggled with speaking, or struggled with sensory overload, is just being in a room where you can say to them and say, hey, look, you're in a room of people who get it. If you have trouble getting a word out, it's okay. We understand. You don't have to explain that. We just know it. We just get it. And there's visible relief on people's faces when they suddenly realize they're around people who get it.
That's true. That's true. The overload is a huge one. Or for me it is. And I think memory was my biggest piece to bring back, especially. I don't really believe the brain can actually multitask. I believe it can only focus on one thing, but you can do a bunch of things quickly in a row. But that went out the window, and that's still today. I just know that I have to keep a list, and because I can't rely on remembering. I'll forget. I know I will, so I'll keep my list. Always stay on it. There was times in the beginning where I actually had, I would have to make Post-it notes and put them in my car for where I was driving to, because I would literally back out the driveway and then not even know where I was going, and then just pull back in and just go back in the house and wait till it all came back to me. And that's when I realized you've got to make notes. You have to make a list, or you're not gonna get past this. You have to retrain everything in your brain and rely on notes. That was my connection to healing, I guess.
So, talking about notes and trying to manage all this information, you managed to, with these challenges and with working through this, you've also managed to go ahead and write a book. So can you tell us a little bit about Westfalia?
Westfalia is an epic spiritual adventure fueled by our deep emotions that takes you on a dream-based journey. And the process of writing, I've written screenplays in the past as well. And just on a quick note, after the stroke, I couldn't write. I would have a thought, and by the time I would get, because I write on yellow pads, and by the time I would get to my pad to write down my thought, it evaporated. And so I put the pen down for quite a while, just trying to write, because the frustration level was so high. But writing the book really took me back through the journey of my own life and the experiences I had as a child, and really took a deep dive into some of the emotional tolls as a child. And then it was all stimulated from being blindsided by my wife asking me for a divorce after 20 years of marriage. So in dealing with the emotions that came up in that process. I knew I was going to go through some heavy emotions. And for about 16 months, I really embraced all those emotions as hard as it was. And I made notes. And once I reached a certain point and the light bulb went off, and I had accepted divorce, but I hadn't forgiven my wife. And once I realized that I could forgive her, that's when I started writing the book, because the idea of the book came to me. I was riding my bicycle. I was on a journey. I was riding across Canada, just trying to escape what I was feeling. And it was a couple of months after she had asked me to leave. And I was riding my bicycle like from Banff to Jasper, which I believe is about 120 miles. And you got to climb a huge glacier, which is over 10,000 feet. And, and it was raining, and there was ice pellets once you started going up the mountain. Like it was not a leisurely day. And that's when the book really came to me. And it was like the universe saying, you're going to go through some emotions and you need to write them down and you need to put this on paper. And I didn't really realize how deep I would actually go and how much my inner child would speak out. And then through the course of it, I came up with this character named Charlie, who's the guide who helps the main character deal with all these emotions. So it was an epic journey.
How much of an impact did your stroke then have on your divorce, do you think? Or is that something that would have happened regardless of your stroke?
I think during the process after the stroke, I probably wasn't the nicest guy to be around. There was definitely some anger and very short-tempered. I felt somewhat abandoned by my wife at that time too, and that probably could have been her just dealing with me, and then young kids. And so I think within any marriage, there's ups and downs, and I'm sure it was a factor. It wasn't something we discussed, but I'm sure it was a factor.
A stroke doesn't just happen to the person who has it. It happens to the people around them as well.
True. And you forget that. I think when you were in the moment of something that's happened to you, you forget the impact that you're having upon those around you.
What was the toughest part about, actually writing it and crafting the story then?
Oh, that's a great question. The toughest part is going back and reliving a lot of the memories. My dad was not the nicest man. So going back through the memory bank and really reliving those memories and putting them on paper, and then knowing that the people are going to know everything about you. So but I knew in my heart, and how I get up like 3 a.m. to write. And so when you get up at 3 a.m, I feel like that's the time the universe really talks to you. And it was telling me, you have to tell your story. Your story can help a lot of people. Everyone has a story. And as human beings, we should all work together. And we should tell our stories. And so just reliving those memories, that's the challenge. And so even today, when I go back through the book and I read some of it, I'm just like, I'm kind of blown away. But in the end, you just know that you've got to share it. And hopefully other people will realize that they need to allow those memories to come forward and forgive accept them, and then forgive the individual who was there with you while you had to go through these things. And I think that's the most important thing, because ultimately we want to get to a point where we live life through love. That's my true belief.
Oh, there's a lot of stuff to unpack in there. There's a lot of power at 3 a.m. and in those late night or super early morning things. Fantasy author Patrick Rothfuss has said things are true at night that are not true during the day. There's just something that at nighttime is a different way of connecting with the universe. Different things come out, or the very idea of the night sort of as its own kind of thing that allows you to connect with. Feels like I'm getting a little woo-woo here, but that allows you to just connect with a different part of yourself or a different part of the world at night when it's quieter and it's dark and it's just a different kind of thing.
The energy in that time of the day, right? That's when most people are sleeping. So the energy of the world is at peace. And that's what you're tapping into. Whereas when we get going, it becomes chaotic, right? That's when the communications start. And I think that's where people, not everyone, but we tend to forget that we're all connected as one moving through this world. And once that energy gets flowing, you may not understand it, but you are feeling it. And so in that 3 a.m. session, that's the perfect time. That's when you've tapped into the universe. It's quiet.
And when you're living a life then, post-stroke or for whatever other reason that is challenged by a hyper-stimulated environment, like you talked about, the challenges of just talking with somebody in a restaurant, at night, there's just less of that extraneous noise and stimulation around us so it allows us to get a little bit deeper into some of the stuff that's really going to matter to us. True. Obviously Westfalia then is a novel, but it's informed a lot by your life then, it sounds like, with some of your concerns about how people are going to react when they see things that are in there. So, how autobiographical is it versus how fictional is it and the events that happen in there?
It's about 90%, maybe more. So it's pretty accurate.
That then becomes another great way to share some of our deeply personal experiences that we need to get out in order to process them and in order to share them with the world and help the world benefit from our experiences. You had a writing background. You had a background in the entertainment industry. So once you had this manuscript, how did you go about getting it published?
I published myself. I didn't want to wait. I'm kind of an impatient person. I went through 3 different editors, and on the third one, she's a really amazing lady, and she pushed me hard in the beginning and said, no, don't self-publish. This really needs to go somewhere. And then the whole COVID process hit. And as we finished up the process, she said, you know what? You need to get this out now. Don't wait on a publishing company. I believe in you. Just self-publish it. You can always shop it later. So I just stayed with my plan. I had self-published a children's book years ago, so I knew the work that was involved, and it's actually easier today than it used to be.
What is it that has become easier with self-publishing now versus when you did your first book?
When I did my first book, I shopped hard to find a printer within the United States. And at that time period, there was one, but their prices were just through the roof. So I went to China actually to print it was a fraction of the cost. And then now today you have everything from Ingram to System. So it's fairly simple. You just need to throw the money at it.
what advice do you have for somebody who may be thinking about writing their own book?
Set a daily page count and write. Don't worry about what you need to write. Just sit down and write.
That's one of those things, too, I think for many survivors, that advice to just go ahead and do it. Set a plan, execute the plan. Set your writing, just go ahead and write. Don't necessarily worry about what you are going to write. That mirrors what a lot of us have to go through in therapy. So we already have the practice with that. You've got to do your exercises. You've got to get them done every day and repeat them in order to get somewhere. And, those skills we acquire in rehab aren't just limited to rehab. They can apply elsewhere as well.
It's true. I mean, when I wrote screenplays, I had a huge, big cork board, and I would take note cards and I would write out 1-sentence scenes. Super simple. And then you have an idea of, obviously, for story, and then start placing those on the board. And then you realize, well, that scene might work better here. And then you look at it, and then you start writing each scene. And the same way with the book, I knew the structure I wanted to go because it was all based on my emotions. And as with anything, when we go through something heavy, you're going to be in denial in the beginning. So that's the beginning. And ultimately, you're going to have this big arc, and you want to be able to get to love. So it seems so simple, and you try to keep it that way. But in order to keep the simplicity, you've got to sit down every day and write. And on the days I don't want to write, I'll usually keep 2 notepads side by side. And when I find myself drifting, I'll go to the other notepad and I'll usually write poetry. So at least you're staying engaged. And if you can keep the engagement, you'll always come back to the other notepad and continue to write, because you'll let all the distractions subside and you'll just focus on what you need to write on.
One of the things I have found that when whether it's personal writing or whether it's writing I'm having to do for work or whatever, when I find I'm just staring at a blank screen and just can't write anything and the block is getting in the way, it's because it's my inner critic which is stopping me. And my way to sort of punch through that is to just tell myself, okay, I am going to try and write now as badly as I possibly can. Let me just write some junk that is just stupid and useless. Because once I do that, then that opens up the floodgates, and then I can start writing once I've given myself permission and even required myself just write badly. That's one way I have found to bypass that sort of inner critic imposter syndrome. And once I start writing badly and just start writing, somehow or other good stuff sometimes comes out of that too.
Exactly. You can give yourself permission to do everything, because as a writer, you'll find every excuse in the book and every distraction. And you can also say, like, let's say you want to have distraction. You say, oh, I want to research something on Instagram. And you go, you can look, but not right now. So you've given yourself permission, but you just can't do it right now. You got to wait. We tend to do a lot of research because then we don't have to write. We can just research. So I usually just put my head down, and I write on the yellow pad too, so I can just keep focus. Computer's not even near where I am. And then the next morning, I'll take what I've written, or I'll wait a few days and then input that into my computer. And then when you're doing that, you'll actually do a little rewrite. So it's a way of tricking myself into making a rewrite as I go through and make a couple of changes, where I don't feel like I'm having to actually go back and do the rewrite.
One of the things we talk about in stroke recovery all the time is the importance of neuroplasticity. And the core behind neuroplasticity is that the nerves that fire together wire together. The brain is looking for patterns. It's looking to form habits. And the more we do a thing, the more connections within our brain wire together to make it easier to do that thing. We often think about that in terms of standing up or walking, taking one step in front of the other. You're just trying to repeat those motions again and again and again to build those new connections, get more parts of the brain wired up to do that so you can do that more easily. But it's not just about walking, and it's not just about doing speech therapy and all these types of things. It's also about the other things in life. And it sounds like one of the things you've done is you've also built that pattern in your brain to write on that yellow pad in that same way. That helps. The more you've done that, the more your brain is now associated that with, it's time to go ahead and write and to do this. And the more you do that, the deeper that pattern gets, the easier it becomes to put yourself in the position to go ahead and do that.
I use music for that too. I listen to the same 2 albums, and I have for quite some time, which stimulates my brain to go, okay, it's time to get busy. And you would think I was nuts, because like I will listen to them for hours and hours and hours over and over and over. But at a certain point, I don't hear it, but it engages my brain to go, okay, it's time to get busy. And I always say Jackson Browne and I have written so much stuff together.
So what are those 2 albums?
It's the 2 solo acoustic albums. He tells stories while he performs, but at a certain point, whatever happens within those albums engages my brain. I don't even know why I started listening to them and writing, but they work, and it truly gets me on a path. And sometimes I'll just put them on if I need to be in a creative mode, and it helps out.
It's a way of controlling your inputs and setting that stage and getting the brain into that. That's a great way of going about doing that. So let's get to the absolute most important question, of course, today, though. And that's, how do you make an awesome cup of coffee?
I do. Lately I've been doing a French press, which I enjoy. And then I get my coffee beans out of this little coffee shop in Oregon, and they literally like roast them and ship them to you. So I think that's the key. Grind your beans, and because once you grind your beans, they're only fresh for I think freshness only lasts 20 minutes. So that's what I do. Sometimes I do a pour over though, but I do have an espresso machine too. But my daughter seems to have taken that over.
As a Seattle resident, I can absolutely appreciate the details that go into making that cup of coffee to go ahead and get through the day, and even to start the day.
Yeah, exactly. Just 1 cup. That's all I do.
And that brings us to our hack of the week. But first, let's talk about sponsor Modus Nova. When I recently fired up my Modus Hand for some at-home therapy, I noticed that there are some new video games to play and some other enhancements to the system. One of the things I like about it is that it just keeps getting better. The Modus Hand from Modus Nova is an air-powered, AI-controlled robotic exoskeleton that I wear on my affected arm to play video games. It helps me get in the thousands of repetitions that I need to get my arm and my hand back. And it does that as I play those games. The Modus Hand assists or resists my movement so I can get the most out of my workout. To find out if Modus Nova can help you recover the use of an affected limb after stroke, visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova. Use promo code STROKECAST for 10% off your first month. And now back to our hack of the week.
I'm a huge Wayne Dyer fan, and I think everyone's stroke, as you had said, is completely different, and we all experience in different ways. But I think first would be accepting where you are, and then allowing yourself to process what's happening to you, and then forgiving yourself for maybe having feelings that you may be mad at yourself, you'd be mad at the world, but forgive all that and and then truly think about where you want to be, visualize that, and then using a mantra of, I am strong, I am walking, I am love. Go through your mantra, find what works for you, find where you want to be. And even on the days you don't feel it, do it anyway. Just lie to yourself, because you can make that happen. And maybe you only get 10% better, but that's 10% better than you were.
That's great. That is super helpful way of approaching that. And especially with that whole idea of forgiving yourself is one of those things that a lot of us struggle with that we haven't had to think about before, and can become a super important way of getting through this.
True. And if anybody has any questions, they want to DM me on Instagram, feel free.
It's fantastic. So yeah, that's a great way to sort of wrap things up here. If folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
They can go to my website at byBlakeHill.com, BlakeHill.com, Instagram, byBlakeHill. You can shoot me a friend request on Facebook. We also have By Blake Hill at Facebook, which is just for the book. Or you can go to my personal page, just Blake Hill. So that's probably Instagram DM is the best way if someone wants to reach out.
Well, great. And we'll have all of those links over at strokecast.com/byBlakeHill. So Blake, I mean, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining us on the show this week.
Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. It's been awesome.
Now let's talk about sponsor Like Minded. Have you checked out the classes from Like Minded? You can visit strokecast.com/likeminded to get started. Like Minded is a nonprofit membership program featuring online classes and meetings run by OTs, PTs, stroke survivors, and more. Sessions cover everything from hand therapy to how to tell your story. Members can attend as many sessions as they want and even get access to a private text messaging group for more personal support. Get the support that you need and deserve by joining Like Minded today. Visit strokecast.com/likeminded to learn more and use the promo code STROKECAST to save 20% off your first month. Now, I have always been a night owl. When I was a kid, my mother would, tell me to turn off the light and go to sleep. And I would always negotiate to just read one more chapter of whatever book I was still reading, and to just get that little bit of extra time at night to do things that I really enjoy. I've probably been still awake for more sunrises than I have woken up for. And I would much rather stay up until 3 a.m. than wake up at 6 a.m. As Blake and I talked about, there's just something magical about late night. Of course, it's a little harder these days thanks to neurofatigue, which sometimes just demands sleep now. But there's still a comfort and peace I find in the overnight. And part of that may just be because the night is also a liminal space. And I happen to have a fondness for liminal spaces. You see, a liminal space is basically it's a place of transition. It's neither an origin nor a destination. It's not really even a travel activity itself. It's a border. Airports and generic business hotels often fall into this category. I mean, it's a place that's on your journey where you move from one phase of your journey into another phase of your journey. And it's a place where you can rest and you can prepare. Truck stops are like that for me too. I mean, I have spent many nights traveling throughout the Pacific Northwest in vans back in my college speech and debate days. And I've driven solo across the country several times myself and done various other road trips in that time. But when you roll into a truck stop in the middle of the night and you step out of your car, you're met with that humid, frosty air and just sort of that low rumble of semis parked all around you as you fuel up the car and probably your body, getting some snacks and some coffee or some beverages or some raspberry iced tea Snapple or whatever it is you happen to be consuming at that point in your life. Or you might pull into a rest stop to climb into the back seat of the car and pull a blanket over yourself to nap for a few hours before you head out into the daylight later on to, find coffee and eggs and biscuits as you begin the next leg of your journey. Or you might sit next to an empty pool deck on a cruise ship, sort of writing what may become the next abandoned draft of a book or speech you're working on while you sip coffee from a cup that is, comically small for somebody who drinks way too much coffee. You see, these are all liminal spaces. They're ones that are not quite here nor there. They're spaces where a barrier is sort of separating one world or reality from another world. And yet that reality and that border may become more porous at times. The night itself is, it's one of the biggest liminal spaces that are out there. It's dark and quiet, yes, but it also separates today from tomorrow. In the way we catalog time, the night is what separates past from the future, and in some ways gives us the biggest sense of now. To get to tomorrow, we have to pass through the liminal space that is the night. The time immediately after a stroke can be a liminal place too, and it can be a dangerous one. Liminal spaces are ones that we're meant to pass through as we continue on to our destination. We're not meant to stay in them forever. I mean, sure, it can be a good place to rest and take a break, but most of us shouldn't be moving into the backseat of our car at a truck stop on a forever basis. Stroke marks the end of our previous life. We've been irrevocably altered by that stroke, and our previous life is over. And as we go through rehab and recovery, inpatient or outpatient, we are in that transitional space that began with when we had that stroke. Of course, that transition doesn't necessarily end with the end of therapy. And it doesn't have to continue while we're in therapy. The transition is one that we have to navigate our way through, however. At some point, we have to start living our new post-stroke life, whatever that may be. I mean, maybe it looks similar to the one we left behind. And maybe it looks markedly different, but we survived our stroke to continue to live a life, to pursue our goals, and to be with our friends and our family. And all those things may or may not look different. And moving into that next phase doesn't mean forgetting about the stroke. It means learning from that and adding it to the tapestry of experiences that make up our lives as we figure out how to live our life for the next few years or decades or, optimistically, centuries. Right when I got home from the hospital, my girlfriend, she helped me get up to the apartment and get situated on the couch. And then she had to go out to the pharmacy to pick up my prescriptions. It was the afternoon of July 1, 2017, and for the first time in a month, I was alone. I was by myself, and in the quiet of the living room, I could sit on the edge of the couch and ask myself, what now? And that began my journey through the next phase of my life as I left that one liminal space that I had been in since getting into that ambulance a month earlier. Now, some people find themselves very uneasy in liminal spaces. I happen to find them quite comfortable. Whether that's going to be in a hotel room that is just as likely to be in Tampa, Florida as it is Columbus, Ohio, I find comfort in the truck stop and comfort in the night. But eventually, regardless, you need to leave the room. You need to get back on the road, or you need to go to bed and wake up so you can start a new day. And that's what makes those spaces so important. So be sure to check out Blake's book, Westfalia, and connect with him on Instagram. You can find all those links over at strokecast.com/byBlakeHill. That's BYBLAKEHILL. Strokecast.com/byBlakeHill. Share this episode with someone you know by giving them the link, strokecast.com/byBlakeHill. Of course, be sure to subscribe to the free monthly Strokecast email newsletter for more updates from your favorite guests over at strokecast.com/news. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.